again, the polls coming out are showing all-time lows for faith and belief in the commercial media. And you see numbers like 95% of the Republicans have doubts, but the numbers are creeping up on the other side too. In all seriousness, what can the news media do to fix this problem? Because during COVID, it's turned out to be kind of a catastrophic issue when the public doesn't trust the news media. You and I have worked in this business a long time, and you've had a particularly troubling journey through it. Well, we both have. But what do you see as something that they can realistically do to win back audience trust?
They don't want to win back audience trust.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, their motive, you've written about this. I mean, look, their motive is to cater to a particular demographic by which they will make money. That's it. I mean, I look at this Caliphate podcast that was done by the New York Times. Totally based on a fraud, on somebody who made up these stories. I think back on my own career out of the Middle East. If I had written a 10-part series, and it was this, had this kind of quality of like a snuff film to it. If I had written this thing, I'd have been out of a job. I can't believe it. But there's no price to pay because it caters to the demonization of Muslims. It caters to what the demographic thinks about Muslims. And that's the problem. Journalism has collapsed. It's all about placating your demographic in order to keep that demographic and keep your advertising. When I sued Obama over Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which overturned the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, which had prohibited the military from being used as a domestic police force, nobody touched it. Fox didn't touch it. MSNBC didn't touch it. CNN. The only, other than court news and the people who cover legal stuff, the only major publication that covered it was the New York Times, which did cover it and wrote an editorial praising the judge's decision, which issued a temporary injunction. We won in the Southern District Court of New York, and then Obama administration appealed it in the Second Circuit, and it's now law, unfortunately. But for me, it was a last glimpse of that old guard at the New York Times that still understood what news was, what journalism was. That's vanishing, going, and as you get a new generation in, they carry, let's talk about the New York Times, NPR, they carry that disdain for the deplorables. Look at the coverage of Biden. Look at the way anything harmful to Biden during the campaign was willfully censored out of the press or dismissed, even if it was true. Hunter Biden's laptop being perhaps one of the best examples. Nobody's disputed that is factual. I mean, I'm a very strong supporter of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has never retracted anything they've put out. I mean, it's kind of a remarkable record. But journalism itself is a victim. And that was also true, by the way, in Yugoslavia, because you had to take sides in order to survive. So if you were in Croatia, you parroted back Croatian nationalism. If you were in Sarajevo, you would parrot back Izetbegovic and Muslim nationalism. If you were in Belgrade, you would parrot back Slobodan Milosevic and Serbian nationalism. And if you didn't do that, you didn't have a job. And that's kind of what's happened. So the media doesn't have any more within it the ability to be self-corrective because that's not its goal. That's not its intent. That's not what it's trying to do. And that, of course, is very, it's sad and troubling and heartbreaking for those of us, you, me, who care about journalism. And those of us who are outliers, they work very hard to discredit.
I remember you wrote about Michael Moore giving his speech at the Oscars and coming back and turning on the TV and seeing even liberal commentators, bashing him, which was amazing. You just mentioned Assange. I know you recently gave a speech on his behalf. I wanted to ask you about the media response to that story too, because I find it curious. Well, that's the point.
Right.
Do you think that there's actually a lack of understanding on the part of the journalists who are electing and especially the editors who are electing not to cover this story, or is it resentment over his perceived role in 2016? what happened there, because there was a moment in time when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were considered sort of partners of even the commercial media. Like, well, there was that moment, and now he's so completely on the outs that they just won't even cover the story.
Well, it was a forced marriage. They were never partners with any kind of amicable relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I write for Sheer Post, run by Bob Sheer, used to be the editor of Ramparts, a real journalist, still with us and producing great stuff. So, but when Bob ran Ramparts, they were exposed COINTELPRO. They were the first publication that printed that iconic photo of the little girl running down the road in Vietnam, being burned by napalm. And as Bob has said correctly, that the alternative press forced, in a way that WikiLeaks did, forced the commercial press to do their job, because they knew that if they didn't publish the revelations that WikiLeaks exposed, they would pull back the veil on their complicity with power. And so they were forced, but they never liked Julian. And so there was, they took the information and used it because they were forced to, because their bankruptcy would have been on public display had they not. And then they turned to destroy Julian. I think we have to, I'm talking about, so having spent 15 years in the New York Times, we can't underestimate the power of careerism. So it's not that there's a lot of talent, or there was when I was there at the Times. I mean, real talent, journalistic talent, intellectual depth, it was all there, with one great failing, and that is that they prostrated themselves before the institution. They needed the imprimatur of the New York Times to tell them who they were. And they'd spent very hard to get a job there. It takes a long time, and they can't exist without that imprimatur of the paper. And so they know what is going to further their career and what isn't. And there's a cynicism there. And I think most of the cheerleaders for the war in Iraq, and that was most of the press, didn't have any real opinion about Iraq, or didn't know much about Iraq, but they were very acutely aware of what was good for their career and what wasn't. And it's careerism. So there are no rules written on the walls of the New York Times. Don't do this, don't do that. But when I was there, Noam Chomsky's name never appeared in the paper. That wasn't written down as a rule, but you would have to be very hard-headed or ignorant not to very quickly imbibe that culture. It's like the story of how did Abe Rosenthal eventually become the editor of the New York Times. He went up to after the riots where the New York City police came in and beat Columbia University students, many quite severely. He went into the president's office, and it was trashed, and quoted the president talking about how could they do this to books? How could they be such animals? He immediately shot upwards at the paper and became the executive editor. That's how it works. So it's careerism. And these people are unfortunately careerists, and they really can't function, or they can't imagine functioning without that institutional veneer.
Hello, thank you so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For full episodes and extended interviews, please subscribe at usefulidiots.substack.com. You can subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/usefulidiots for clips, live streams, and full episodes. Also, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod and use the hashtag UsefulIdiotsPod. Join us Mondays at 10 a.m. for the Useful Idiots Monday Morning Show, where we discuss the Sunday morning news shows so you don't have to watch them.